the most relevant stories in Buddhism, and we're going to talk about the Buddha and how he became the Buddha. Why are we even here at this temple? How did this all start? And it's a wonderful story. It is, it's just a wonderful story that really talks a lot about. It's really a hero's kind of journey, if you would, like a Joseph Campbell, a hero's journey that we're going to talk about. And how much of this has actually happened exactly the way it happened? We don't know. Does it matter? Not really. The thing about this story is that there are probably about 900 versions of it. What I'm going to just talk about is, or the story I'm going to tell is from the earliest texts that we have, for the most part. For the earliest texts that we have. I don't really talk too much out of that because there are so many different versions of the story. So I just go back to the earliest sources and just kind of tell the story from that. Because, as Buddhism travels from country to country, to culture, to language, the story kind of develops. It's not that major parts of the story change, but the way they tell stories might change. And so they might change wording here, or they might have a different word for something. And so not everything is one-to-one. And that's perfectly fine. As long as you're getting the basic gist of the story, that's all that really matters. And that's the thing to really understand about Buddhism and how Buddhism spreads to different countries and different cultures and different things like that. Every country where Buddhism goes to, it develops its kind of own flavor, if you will. So Thai Buddhism is very based in Thai culture. Tibetan Buddhism is very based in Tibetan culture. Same thing in Japan and China and all these different countries where Buddhism is the majority religion. And that's the way it's supposed to be. One of the things that the Buddha said was when you go teach the Dharma, you go teach the Dharma in the language and the customs of wherever you're teaching it from. And that's perfectly fine. And so that what allows just kind of really a lot of flexibility. So it's okay that there are 900 versions of the story. It really doesn't matter. Buddhism developed in Japan and China and all these different countries, and it took on that kind of culture or adopt that kind of culture in that country, and that's perfectly fine. And it's really, since Buddhism is so new to this country, it's going to be really interesting to see how it kind of develops in the U.S. We have a lot of different cultures here, and it'll be very interesting to see how it kind of develops here over the next couple hundred years, because it takes a while. To be honest, Buddhism has only been here less than 100 years, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but that's all right. It's not a problem. I first told this story, I don't even know how long it was. I know Jeff asked me to tell this story the first time at this school, King Chavez High School. And so I did it, and it was 15 minutes. My 15-minute story, because one, that's about all I could remember. And two, the kids, they didn't want anything more than 15 minutes if you're going to bore them. And so that was the perfect length. But as I began to tell the story more and more and more, I began to remember more of the story, and so I would practice it, and I would just say, all these things happen. And I used to have notes, no, I don't have any notes. I have one note just to remember something very specific. Hello. And if you also want to, there was a wonderful special on this that PBS did years ago with Richard Gere and a few other people and some monks and nuns, and they did a wonderful retelling of the Buddha's enlightenment story. So we're going to talk about his early life. We're going to talk about, even before he was born, we're going to talk about his life up until enlightenment. Then we're actually going to talk about a little bit after enlightenment. And then if I'll open it up for questions after. if I say something and you don't hear me, or if I mumble or something, you can say, "What?" or raise your hand or something like that, and I'll just go and repeat what I say. So any questions before I start? All right, yes?
Is there a meditation period?
No. I thought about that, but, the story takes like almost an hour to tell. So it's actually like 45 minutes, but, still, it's a long way. It's a long time. All right. So our story starts in what is now present-day southern Nepal, in the tiny kingdom of the Sakya people. And there was a king, Suddhana, and his wife, Maya. And they were a very happy couple. They were part of the Sakya kingdom, known to be, warriors. And they had a wonderful life together. The problem was they didn't have an heir. They didn't have any children, which was a big deal for them, of course, because, you needed to pass on your kingdom to your heir. And they didn't have any children. And it had been a while. And so one night, when Queen Maya went to sleep, she had this dream. And she had this dream where a beautiful white tusker elephant came down and entered her right side. And when she, carrying a lotus flower, and when she asked the local sage what that meant, he goes, "Oh, this is great news. This means that you're with child." And after a little while, she actually was with child. And this was incredible news. The king was happy. The kingdom was happy. Everybody was happy because he was going to have an heir. And the interesting thing about this pregnancy was that, she was incredibly happy. She was incredibly euphoric during this whole pregnancy. She couldn't tell a lie. She couldn't have impure thoughts. She couldn't, do anything that was unwholesome whatsoever. And it was a wonderful just kind of pregnancy for her. And when the time came for her to give birth, and she knew the time was getting close, the custom of the time was you go to your mother's house to give birth. And so she packed up everybody, her whole retinue, her security detail, all the animals that she would need, all of the ladies in waiting, or whatever they call them, the servants, and everybody else. And she gathered that whole group, and they went off to her mother's house. And about halfway through, something happened. And she says, "Oh, you have to stop. Stop right now. Stop." And they go, "Well, what's wrong?" And she goes, "This baby's coming now." And so she just instinctively stopped the carriage. She got out, and she went to the foot of a tree, and she turned around, and she raised her arms up like this. And when she did that, one of the branches of the tree lowered, and she instinctively just grabbed it. And she just had the child right then and there. A very painless birth. And before I go any further, I will just say that there are fantastical elements to this story. Okay? There are fantastical elements to the story, and just let them be fantastical. And so the baby comes out and exits her right side, and the baby takes 7 steps and points up in the air and says, "This is my last birth." And so, since she didn't have to go to her mother's anymore, they packed up everything and they went back. And unfortunately, Queen Maya died 7 days later. That's okay. She was born in the highest heaven, or reborn in the highest heaven, so she was okay. But another thing that happened when the child was born was that there was a great shaking of the earth. There was a great shaking at the conception. There was a great shaking at the birth. And this only happens when it's a very prominent kind of occasion, when this only happens with a very prominent kind of person. And when this child was born, during that shaking of the earth, it awakened a great sage in the mountain. His name was Asita. And Asita felt this great shaking. He knew that something was up, and he knew it was in the Sakyan kingdom. And so he started going down the mountain when everyone was going back to the kingdom. And so 7 days later, unfortunately, Queen Maya passed away. But also what happened 7 days after the birth of a child is the naming ceremony. And so they had the naming ceremony, and they said, we're going to call him Siddhartha. And Siddhartha means one who accomplishes his goals. And the king was incredibly happy it was a boy, because I have an heir, and I'm going to teach him to be a warrior king like me, and this is fantastic. Not super happy about my wife, but everything else was fantastic. Actually, it was quite sad, because they were very much in love. And so they get back, they have the naming ceremony, and then Asita just barges into the chamber and says, what happened here? Where is this child? I heard there was a child. I need to see the child right now. Now, you see, he could do that because they had the caste system in India at the time. The king Suddhana was the warrior class, Kshatriya. The Asita was the priestly class, which was the highest caste. So he can do whatever the heck he wants. He can barge in anywhere and tell some warrior king whatever he wants to tell him. And so he barges in and he says, let's see this, what happened? And let's see this child. And so they show him the child, and Asita goes up and he just examines the child, like just so intently for a long time. And the king Suddhana, he's getting just like frustrated and just annoyed, really. And he says, well, what is it? And then after a short period of time, Asita looks up with some sort of like earnestness, and he says, there are two possibilities for this child. He will either be a great warrior king, and he will unite the warring kingdoms of India. Because at the time, India was not India. India was about 16 different kingdoms that were all warring with each other like all the time, gaining land and ceding land and gaining some more land, and just kind of going back and forth all the time. And there were 16 kingdoms, and he said, well, either he'll unite all the kingdoms of India and be a great warrior king, or he will be a great wheel-turning sage, a great religious man. And Suddhana, the king, said, oh, I know what he's going to be. He's going to be a great king, because he is my son. And I'm a king, and I'm a great warrior king, so my son will be the great warrior king and unite all the kingdoms of India. And he was incredibly excited about this. But he had to have a plan to do so, right? But then he looked at Asita again, and Asita had these tears in his eyes, and he goes, well, what? He thought it was something horrible, something bad. And he goes, this child will accomplish such wonderful, great things, and I will never see it. I'm too old. I will die before he accomplishes all of these great things. But I will leave you now. And Asita goes back, and King Suddhana, he makes a plan. He does not want him to become a wheel-turning sage. He doesn't want him to become a great religious person. He only wants him to be exposed to like the military and fighting and the skills that he'll need to be a great warrior king, right? So he says he can't have like compassion he can't really experience lots of compassion, right? So I'm going to do everything in my power so that he doesn't do that. And so he built these three castles for him, or these three compounds for them, or palaces. One for the summer, one for the winter, and one for the rainy season. And he had these these palaces, have ponds of blue lotuses and red lotuses and white lotuses, and they were very, very beautiful, right? And all of the flowers around the palaces, whenever they started to wilt just a little bit and die, he had them plucked. The people the king surrounded himself with were young, full of vigor and life. No old people whatsoever. No sick people whatsoever. Because then he might have some compassion for a sick person or an old person or anything. Right? He was entertained all the time with dancing girls and entertainers and things like that. And while this time, he's still getting an education. He's still getting, somewhat of a religious education. He's getting an incredible education for a warrior king. He's learning how to do all the combat arts, wrestling and boxing and hand-to-hand combat and archery and horse riding and all these different things that he will need to become a great warrior king. And he was really, really, really good at all of them. He was strong. He was fast. And the king was incredibly happy for a very long time. Young Siddhartha got married at 16 to a beautiful young woman named Yashodhara. And they were deeply, deeply in love. And they were deeply in love for a long time. And, kind of oddly, they didn't have children for a while. But, next thing you know, Siddhartha, who was very sheltered, because he stayed in these different palaces depending on the season. He never went out in town unless it was like on a kind of a very structured kind of outing where they got rid of all the people that looked sick or old or anything like that. And he lived like that very happily for 29 years. And so here he is, Siddhartha, young, handsome, 29, great warrior, going to inherit his father's kingdom pretty soon. And he's just out there with his charioteer, Channa, and his best friend. And he's just practicing his archery, bullseye, bullseye, bullseye. He was really good. So he's just there practicing his archery and just hitting bullseye left and right. And something happened to him. Something happened. He just said, "Hey, Channa, I have an idea. Let's go out in town." And Channa's like, he knew he was not supposed to go out in town unsupervised. Absolutely not. And so he goes, "Sorry, we can't. The king said that you can't do that." He goes, "What are you talking about? Of course I can. I'm the prince, so I can tell you what to do. Get a chariot and let's go out in town." All right. He had to do what he said, So they go out in town, and at first everything is fine. And then he sees the first of 4 messengers. Right? He sees this person kind of holding a cane with kind of gray, kind of ratty kind of hair, wrinkles on their face, walking very gingerly with this staff, hunched over. And he goes, "Channa, what's that? What is that person? Why are they like that?" And Channa looks at it and goes, "Well, that's just an old person. That's a person who's lived many, many years. And that's what happens. That's just an old person." He goes, "What?" He had never seen an old person. Like the oldest person he ever saw were his parents. So never having seen something like that, he was really, really worried because this person just didn't look good to him. Right? Not what he's used to looking at. And he goes, "Does everybody get old?" And Channa goes, "Of course everybody gets old. Everybody gets old and everybody kind of looks like this or something like this after a while. That's just the way that life is." And he was freaked out, our friend Siddhartha. He had never seen anything like that before. you know? And so suddenly, here comes some compassion, you know? And so he goes to his father, tells him what he saw. His father is not happy because he wasn't supposed to go out of the palace unsupervised. And he puts on this play about, oh, old people, ha ha ha, that won't happen to you, you don't have to worry about it. And he goes, he kind of felt better after that. Then a short time later, he goes, Chana, let's go out again, let's go out in town. And Chana, protested again. And but didn't really do much good. His friend, even though it's his friend, he's the prince, he has to do with the princess. And so they go out in town, they see old person, okay. And then he looked in this, the window of this home, and he sees this person lying on a bed, just skin pale, coughing and hacking and sweating and just like phlegm and whatever coming out of his nose and mouth, just really, really, really ill. And he sees this person. He goes, Chana, what's wrong with that person? He goes, oh, that's just a sick person. He goes, a sick person? What do you mean a sick person? Well, that's just a person who's sick. He has an illness. He needs a doctor. He needs medical attention. And that's just what happens when you get sick. He goes, wait, does everybody get sick? And China goes, of course everybody gets sick. You're going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. I've been sick. Your parents have been sick. Everybody you know has been sick. But again, he's never seen that before. Because in the palace, when somebody even sneezed, they were taken away. And so he's really upset about this. More compassion. More compassion. And he goes to his father. Father's still not happy. He went out again. They tried to put on a play. They put on a play about sick people. Oh, this isn't going to happen to you. And he's not super convinced by this at this time, But, his father's doing his best. They go out again a little while later. So they see an old person. They see a sick person. Check, check. Got that. And then he sees this corpse lying along the side of the river. Now, back in Nepal, India of the time, during those days, if you were rich, you got like a nice funeral pyre. But if you weren't, you got left at the side of a river or on the side of the street, and you eventually were carted to the charnel ground. And the charnel ground is where they just kind of threw your body. They just threw your body, and then the jackals and the vultures would just like pick at it, and you would eventually just kind of rot there. And that was very normal for them. So he sees this dead body, and he asks Chana, well, what is this? He goes, oh, that's just a corpse. That's just a dead person. The life has left this body. That's all. And he's really freaking out. He goes, does this happen to everybody? And he goes, of course this happens to everybody. Everybody gets old. Everybody gets sick. Everybody dies. That's just the way that it is. That's just life. And, he goes back to his father. They try another play. It's not working. And, again, more compassion for the first time. And it's just building and building and building. And then the last of the four messengers, they go out again and, okay, old person, sick person, dead person, check, 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 get that. And then they see this man who, this particular kind of ascetic, had really long hair, and in some sects, the religious people, no zafus, of course, during that time, right? No comfy cushions to sit on. So they would grow their hair really, really long and then bunch it up and sit on it. And that was their cushion, if you will. So he sees this, and he says, sitting against a tree, he goes, well, Chana, who's that? He goes, well, that is an ascetic. That is a religious person. And they are trying to find a way out of old age, sickness, and death. They're trying to find an escape from this. And he's meditating, trying to find enlightenment. And, he goes to Chana. He goes, well, is that even possible? And he goes, I don't know. I guess. I think so. He thinks so. So I guess it is. Again, Chana's just a charioteer. He's not a philosopher. And so when he heard from Chana that, well, there looks to be an escape out of old age, sickness, and death, he goes, that's what I'm doing. The compassion that welled up and built up, and it was built up in him was so great that he knew what he needed to do. He needed to find a way out of old age, sickness, and death. Not just for him, but for everybody, for all beings. That was the strength. That was the strength. That was the quantity, if you will, of his compassion that built up. Because he had never felt compassion, really, or true compassion, I should say. And so he goes to his father, and he's like, "Okay, look, I know you want me to be this great warrior king, but I can't do it. I'm going out, and I'm going to find a way out of old age, sickness, and death." And this was really a fortunate time for him to do it. India at the time was going through a great religious renaissance, if you will. The religious class had been really in power for a long time, and they were somewhat corrupt. You want a ritual for the spring planting? Pay up. Right? Oh, you want a funeral rites for your father? Pay up. Oh, you want us to intercede with the gods on your behalf for this thing or that thing? Pay up. And money, sacrifices, animals, everything. And this made the religious class quite wealthy, right? They're quite wealthy, quite powerful. And people were not really happy about that. And so they said, "To heck with you. We're going out into the forest, and we're starting our own communities and with our own dharma, our own teachings. And to heck with you guys." And so there were a lot of people in the forest right now. You couldn't shake a stick in the forest without hitting 20 gurus. That's how it was at the time. So there was a little problem, though. You see, his wife, Yashoda, just had a baby. 7 days prior. And so that night that Siddhartha said, "I'm leaving," he was at the door of the bedchamber. He saw his wife just lying there with their son. And it was 7 days. The baby hadn't been named yet. And he said, "I didn't go up to my wife, and I didn't kiss her, and I didn't hold my child. Because if I did, I wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't have had the strength to leave." So he just stood there at the door of the bedchamber, pointed at the child and said, "I name you Rahula." And Rahula means fetter. A fetter is a ball and chain, a shackle. And he named him this because if he stayed, he'd be shackled to this child, shackles to this life. So he named him Rahula, and he went with Chana off to the forest, to the beginning or the entrance to the forest. Another problem was that our friend Siddhartha had lived an incredibly privileged life, right? Wearing only the finest of clothes, only having the finest of things. He said, I lived a very sheltered life, a privileged life. I had a sunshade over me for the sun to protect me from the sun, and insects and the rain and the snow and all these different types of things. I only wore the finest clothes, had the finest things. And then he had managed to scrape up these rags of a forest ascetic. And he took off his clothes, he put on these rags, and he took his sword and he chopped off his hair. And he bid farewell to Channa. Channa was in tears. It was a big deal for him. It was a big deal, period. And he went off into the forest to find enlightenment. He had no idea how he was going to do it, but he did it. And he went off. And he goes, okay, I need to find a guru. I need to find a teacher. Fortunately, tons of teachers, right? And he came across this one teacher. His name was Alara Kalama. And Alara Kalama had this great following. He was a great meditator. And he can get up to this meditative state called nothingness. It's a state now. It's like the third of the fourth formless states. And so he learned Alara Kalama's Dharma. He learned his meditation technique really, really quickly. He was really good at this. I mean, sure, there was some struggles, but he was really good at it. And so after a very short time, he was just as good as anybody else. But one thing he realized is that he'd get up to this state of nothingness, and he'd come out of meditation, and he's still suffering. So time after time after time, he'd get to this state of nothingness. Isn't this great? He'd come out of it. He's still suffering. He still missed his wife. He still wanted to, was still lusted. So all of these things that you would expect any normal human male to have, these feelings. And after a while, he said, I have to leave because, thank you very much, Alara Kalama, but I have to leave. I haven't found my answer here. And Alara Kalama was like, no. How about we do this? We'll share leadership of the Sangha. How about we do that? You're so good at this. I've never met anybody like you. And so that's very tempting. Very tempting, but Siddhartha goes, no, I can't. I haven't found my answer. Thank you very much. And he left. A short time later, he found another teacher. His name was Udaka Ramaputra. And Udaka Ramaputra he can get up to this mental, meditative state called neither perception nor non-perception. In Buddhism, it's like the last of the formless states, just before you get to enlightenment, full enlightenment. Siddhartha's like, great. And he learned his Dharma, he learned his meditation technique, and he can get up to the state of neither perception nor non-perception. He was really good at it, but still he'd come out of this state and he still hasn't found, still not enlightened. Right? Didn't found what he's looking for. And so, he goes, I have to leave. And Udaka Ramaputra said, no, I'll tell you what. Do this. You can lead this Sangha, and you'll be my teacher. And I'll just be under you, and you can lead this whole Sangha all by yourself. Because he had a really big Sangha. And, again, tempting. But he goes, no, I can't do this. And when he left, he just figured, I'm just going to have to figure this out on my own. And, over the time where he was in these two different Sanghas, and other times he had these, 5 friends that he met up with. And they kind of made a pact with each other, right? They said, look, we're just doing this on our own, and we're going to, find enlightenment, and the first one who finds enlightenment will go back and tell the others how they did it. And so they made this pact that that's what they would do. And so for the next 6 years, that's exactly what they did. And they put themselves through the most difficult situations. They'd meditate 23, 24 hours a day. They meditate, in the sun, in the snow, in the rain, in the wind, in the cold, in the heat. They meditate standing on one leg. They meditate, they go to the charnel ground and lay on top of corpses and meditate that way. But because the idea was, at the time, that if you punished the body enough, you could disidentify with the body, and that's how you reach enlightenment. Right? That they figured that's how you do it, right? So that's kind of what they did. And so they punished their body. They ate maybe one handful of rice a day. In some stories, it says 1 grain of rice a day. It's a little much. But, and after a while, after 6 years of punishing the body, he basically looked like this. Right here. This is the emaciated Buddha. This is the emaciated Buddha, and I love that they have that statue here at the Dharma Bum Temple, because the meaning of this statuary is that, hey, we all struggle. Look how he struggled. And he did it. So maybe we can do it too. So this is actually a way to encourage us. Not a way to freak us out. But he was, after 6 years, he's punished his body so much, he's basically near death. His limbs were like twigs. His hair was thin and crackly and ratty. His eyes were super sunken in. They said if you touched his belly, you could feel his spine. And if you touched his spine, you could feel his belly. That's how thin he was. And so, so he's still like this and meditating, and all of a sudden this farm girl walks by with some rice milk. Her name was Sujata. And Sujata sees our friend Siddhartha and oh my God. She goes up to him and says, please, sir, take this rice milk and get your strength back. And normally our friend Siddhartha would just say no and refuse it, send her away, and just keep meditating. But something in him said, what I've been doing for the last 6 years hasn't been working. I am no closer to my answer than I was 6 years ago. And look at my physical state. It's just deteriorated. What if I take this rice milk, get my strength back, get cleaned up, and come up with another strategy? And so that's what he did. He drank or ate this rice milk. And when his 5 friends saw that he did this, they were very upset. They chastised him vehemently. They call him, you're a sellout, you're a food eater. Siddhartha eats food. You're not serious about the path. And so we're going to leave you because you're not serious. And so they left. They wanted nothing to do with him. And so our friend Siddhartha got his strength back after a while. He got some new robes, or, new robes for him. They were still used. He took a bath. He got his physical strength back. And then he said, okay, I need to do something else. And so what he did was he took a look at this tree, this banyan tree, what's now known as the Bodhi tree. He took a look at this tree and said, I am going to sit underneath that tree. And I am going to find enlightenment. And I'm not going to get up from that tree until I find enlightenment. And I have no idea how I'm going to do it. None. And this is really important because it's really the first time that our friend Siddhartha surrendered to the process. Because he says, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm just going to do it. I don't know. I have no idea, but I'm just going to do it. And so he goes to sit underneath this tree. And he sits, and he sits, and he sits. And he's almost there. He's almost there. He's getting really close. He's getting really close. And, oh my gosh. I forgot his name. Not Siddhartha, I remember his name. But the Lord of Desire. Huh? Mara. Sorry. Yeah, that's the one. See, it's been that long since I told the story. Mara, the great lord of desire, the tempter god, knew that our friend Siddhartha was going to escape his clutches. And so he sent the armies of Mara out to attack him, and they attacked him with spears and rocks and everything. And here is our friend Siddhartha, just touched them, and they all turned to flower petals at his feet. And Mara was not happy about this. And so he goes, well, anger didn't work. I know it works. Lust. Lust always works, right? Because he just needed to disturb him from his meditation so he won't become enlightened. So the daughters of Mara arise and start dancing naked in front of him, trying to tempt him from his meditation. And it doesn't work. And then the daughters of Mara turn to stone. And then he's really angry. He's really angry at this point. And he goes, let's see, anger didn't work. Lust didn't work. And so he attacked our friend Siddhartha with his strongest weapon, doubt. And so he goes up to our friend Siddhartha, meditating. He goes, who do you think you are? I mean, honestly, who do you think you are that you can escape my grasp? I have everybody in this world under my grasp. What makes you think you can escape me? So our friend Siddhartha, who's meditating like this, gently touches the ground with his right hand. And then Gaia, the earth goddess, rises up from the ground and appears and says, I'll tell you who he is. This is a person who has lived thousands of lifetimes, thousands, with nothing but good deed after good deed after good deed after good deed, wholesome action after wholesome action after wholesome action. And, that was enough for our friend Mara, because he knew he was defeated. The earth goddess, Gaia, spoke up for him, witnessed for him. And then Mara was defeated. He left. He left. And he was gone. And so he's almost there. And then the last night that he wasn't, the last night of his awakening journey, the night is split up into 3 watches of the night. You got about 6 to 10, 10 to 2, 2 to 6, right? And certain things happen on different watches of the night, different discoveries he made. And when I say discoveries, it's not really discoveries. So like Siddhartha or the Buddha didn't discover all of these things. He rediscovered them. They already existed. Right? We'll just say he rediscovered them. And so on the first watch of the night, he realized that he had lived hundreds, if not thousands, of past lives. Thousands of past lives. In this life, this was my name, this was my clan, these were my deeds. In the life before that, this was my name, my clan, and my deeds. And back 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 and back. But interesting thing was he couldn't go back to the very first life that he remembered on this earth. He couldn't go back that far. And that's why there's no creation story in Buddhism. I guess the kind of a creation story is, or the story, not really a creation story, is that there's a number of world system devolutions and evolutions, collapsing and coming into existence. Right? There's no one point where everything gets created, like in other religions. And then in the second watch of the night, he realized that people were born really based on their karma. And so he really understood all of the intricacies of karma, because karma is monumentally complex. It's incredibly complex. If you think about it, and you think about karma, and you think about what karma is, it's just intention. And if you go through the day, you have literally hundreds of intentions throughout the day, maybe even thousands. And multiply that by day after day after day after day, year after year after year, and the web of intentions and karma that you create is so complex, it's pretty much impossible to just kind of unravel it all. But this is one of the things he discovered. And he discovered or rediscovered a couple of things. One is the dependent origination, or the 12-link chain of causation. Jeff talks about this like a lot. Pratitya Samutpada, right? So he talks about this. That's kind of one of the things that he discovered, and it really is kind of encapsulated in what we call the causal principle in Buddhism. And the causal principle is simply this: from the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this is, that is. With the ceasing of this comes the ceasing of that. And when this isn't, that isn't. And even that, in that kind of encapsulation, takes a long time to really, takes a really long time to just kind of explain, right? But he discovered all of that, and people kind of being born into this world based on their karma. So we've got karma, reincarnation, and then in the third watch of the night, he kind of rediscovers the Four Noble Truths. He discovers what the problem is in this world that will get solved, which is suffering, right? And that's the problem that everybody has, that there is suffering in this life. Not that life is suffering, because that would just be depressing. But that there is suffering in this world. And then the second noble truth, which is the cause of suffering, which is craving and clinging. Craving for sensual desires, craving for becoming and non-becoming. And those three take a long time to talk about as well. And then my favorite noble truth, which is there is a solution. There is a cure to suffering. There is an end to suffering. The end of suffering is possible. And then finally, the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the path leading to the end of suffering. So he kind of discovers or rediscovers all of that. And then at the end of the third watch of the night, he is done. And the earth shakes again. Because he's now an enlightened being. He's no longer Siddhartha. He is the Buddha, the awakened one. And so what he discovered was so monumental. It's so much of a mind trip. And I want to say another word for that. But, it's going to take him a while to integrate all of this. And so he spends like 7 weeks in meditation just figuring all of this out. How he's going to move forward with this. And the thought occurs to him that this is so complex. Maybe I won't teach. Maybe I shouldn't teach. And then one of the gods from the Deva realms, the higher realms, Sahampati, comes down and says, oh no, you have to teach. You will see there are people with little dust in their eyes. And they will get it if you teach them. And so he surveys the world with his new powers. Mentally, and he realizes, yes, there are people with little dust in their eyes, and they will get this. So, after 7 weeks, he arises, and he goes, well, who am I going to first? Well, I made a pact with my friends, my former friends, that whoever found enlightenment first would go teach them. And so he went to go find them. He surveys, they're in the deer park in Benares. So I'm going to go there. And so on his way there, he is walking, as you do, and somebody comes up to him and says, "Oh, friend, you look so bright, and something is different about you. What is it? Are you a god?" "No." "Are you a king or a royal person?" "No." "Then what are you?" And he goes, "I am awake." And his friend goes, "Oh, may it be so." Which basically means like, "Oh, good for you." And he leaves. And so his first attempt to teach, he just kind of fails. Because this person looked different, but he still looked human. And I think that fooled this person because, enlightenment is just, you're still human when you're enlightened. You're not a god, you're not anything like that. You're still a human. And this person thought he should have a halo and all these different types of things, and he didn't. So he finally finds his friends. And so the Buddha's now off in the distance. He's now the Buddha. And his friends see this, their former friend Siddhartha. He goes, "Oh, I think that's Siddhartha. Just ignore him. Ignore him. He's a food eater. We don't need no food eaters around here." Right? And then he gets a little closer and they notice that something is different about him. And they go, "Well, we'll make a seat for him, but we won't talk to him." And then he gets even closer still, and they know that something's really different. And they go to him, "Friend Siddhartha, you look so different. What's?" He goes, "No, I'm not Siddhartha. I have found enlightenment. I have found the answer to old age, sickness, and death. I am the Buddha, the awakened one." And they knew he was telling the truth. And so he goes, "Sit, I will teach you." And they sit, and the Buddha delivers his first sermon. Right? The great lion's roar, as it's called. And when he does this, the earth shakes. Because he's setting in motion the wheel of Dharma with this sermon. First one, he talks about the Four Noble Truths. Talking to them about that. And during his first sermon, one of his former teachers, one of his former religious teachers, who was one of the 5 monks, Kandanya, he goes, "Anya Kandanya, Anya Kandanya," which means Kandanya knows. Because Kandanya reached this kind of first level of enlightenment. Not full, but there are different levels. He reached the first of 3 levels, right? Which was a really big deal. So Anya Kandanya, Kandanya knows. And so, of course, eventually they all reach full enlightenment. And this was the beginning of his teaching career, and he taught for 45 years. 45 years from the age of 35 till 80. It's a long time. And he taught in different languages to different people in different ways. There are 84,000 teachings, supposedly, in Buddhism. And I wouldn't doubt it. Because that's all he did for 45 years, to different people, and taught different ways and different angles and, different cultures and different languages. And because, they had a lot of different cultures even back then. Not everybody believed in reincarnation. You thought they would, but they didn't. And, his Sangha grew and grew and grew and grew. And, that's it. That's it. That is the story. That is why we're here. And I'm so glad that we're here, that I got to kind of talk about the story. It's like 7:57 now, and I took a little more time than I wanted to, but I really got into it. It's been a while. And of course, I couldn't even remember Mara's name because it's been so long. So I apologize for that. Thank you, by the way. But I will take some questions now if anybody has any questions on the story. Or about Buddhism. Yes?
Is it considered in right relation with your wife and kids?
Well, yeah, that's a great, he wasn't Buddhist, he wasn't anything then. He just knew he had a job to do. But she was in good hands. She was super privileged. She was a princess of a kingdom. You have to understand too that all of his family, eventually became members of the Sangha. I mean, not the king, but his stepmother. So when Maya died, the king married her sister, right? And so Prajapati. And Prajapati became the first nun, the first Buddhist nun, which is a big deal at the time because there were no female practicing religious women, right? And she was a trailblazer there. His wife became a nun. His son became a monk. And so they all just kind of joined him eventually. And of course, the Sakya kingdom was overtaken eventually because there was no heir, there was no nothing, right? But that's okay. There's a bigger victory here. But it's a valid question, to be sure.
You mentioned a few like divine beings, like Gaia, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of tradition are they from? Are they from Hinduism or just
No. So, a little bit about Buddhist cosmology. In Theravada Buddhist cosmology, there are 31 planes of existence. Humans are fifth from the bottom. So the reason why we're where we are is that it's the perfect mix of pleasure and pain. Anything below the human realm is too much suffering. Anything above, too much pleasure. And a lot of them are just mental worlds anyway, right? Now, I'm not saying it's real. It's just Buddhist cosmology, right? And so Sahampati, these people come from I think Sahampati came from the heaven of the 33, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Number 9. I think it came from number 9. But even Mara came from a heavenly realm, one of the higher realms. The problem, sometimes, when you're in one of the higher realms, because you have to do a lot of good things to get into the higher realms, according to Buddhist cosmology. The problem can be get too complacent. When you get too complacent, you get a little bit too mischievous sometimes, like Mara. Because Mara did a lot of good deeds. This tempter god guy. But he is a little too full of himself. And you become Mara based on your karma, if you will. And Mara isn't really a person so much as it is a title. Because Mara is like Miss Universe. Miss Universe changes every year, right? Mara changes every so often too. Like a different person is Mara, right? There's no swimsuit competition. It's just kind of like that. So that's why we're in the perfect place. The human realm. The human realm is the best place to be.
But is that what Buddha came up with? Is that part of it, what he realized? This whole this cosmic world?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, so here's the thing. And that's a really good question. The Buddha never really defines the cosmos. He doesn't. That's a lot of that's post Buddha. It's post the Buddha's life. Because one of the things that I didn't say about the story was when the Buddha got enlightened, the earth tilted on its axis and he saw all 31 planes of existence at the same time, different levels of karma and why they're there and things like that. But all that Buddhist cosmology is very post life of the Buddha. So, I mean, but a lot of people believe in it literally. I personally don't, but I think it's fun to talk about. It's so much fun.
But does that come from the sutras or just?
Yeah, I mean, some of it comes from the sutras, but then it gets extrapolated into something bigger over time. So yes, it is in sutras. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So the title, the Buddha and everything,
Mm-hmm.
was that ubiquitous at the time, or they're adjacent Buddhas are also arising?
So at the time, you're going to get a lot of different answers on this, but I'm just going to give you my answer. There's one Buddha, right? And the Buddha was someone who, when there are no Buddhas, he kind of rediscovers everything on his own. And then there's a Buddha, and then he dies, and then there's a Buddhism, right? But then that gets forgotten about over time until no one knows about it, and then the same thing happens again. Someone else rediscovers, and then he's the Buddha. So there was actually a Buddha before Siddhartha. There are several Buddhas before Siddhartha, and there'll be several Buddhas after Siddhartha. Like the next one's going to be called Maitreya. But then you get into Mahayana, and then there's lots of Buddhas. Like all these are Buddhas, so many Buddhas. But that word Buddha means something slightly different. So it's not exactly the same kind of thing. But, again, it doesn't matter. But when I talk about the Buddha, I just talk about the historical Buddha. But if you talk to Mahayana, they could be talking about a number of people. Yeah.
And where is Buddha and Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad historically?
Okay, so yeah, sure. So the Buddha was about 500 BC.
Okay.
Jesus was right 0, right? And then Muhammad was 400 years later.
Okay.
And then around the same time as the Buddha was Confucius. They were about the same time.
Both before Jesus.
Both before Jesus, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Also, got to tell this story. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I think we have some. Do you have some announcements?
I have some announcements. Hey everyone, my name is Dave.